I have always been a fan of horror. Zombies, vampires, I, Cenobites, just monsters in general. GameMasters here, and most of my role playing games will usually dip into the realm of horror. Usually you'll find zombies roaming the lands or vampires taking up residence in that old castle over there up on the hill. Recently, Wizards of the Coast dropped the stat block on the Vampire Familiar, and I want to go over that today in detail. And I'll tell you this up front. Some of what we're going to talk about may be a touch on the mature and sensitive side. While we don't get any background on this familiar, and this is a sneak peek, by the way, so it's not everything that we're going to ultimately get when the new Monster Manual comes out, but we are given enough information to begin using this vampire familiar. Now, based on the name, I think it's safe to assume that these are not vampires themselves, but are rather something considered to be a blood doll. For those of you that used to play Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire familiars are essentially concubines to the vampire, someone that has been enslaved to follow the vampire's command, to do their bidding, but also to be a reserve of blood when said vampire needs a snack. Now, the vampire familiar is humanoid, of neutral evil alignment. While the depiction here looks to be very much human, I'm certainly going to use this, or going to assume that we can use this as a skin of sorts that we'll be able to use to mod up other humanoids, at least in their visual description. I mean, imagine running across a bugbear, for example, that's been turned into a vampire's familiar. That's kind of scary. They have an armor class of 15, 65 hit points, and a speed of 30 feet. Their initiative is +5, and they have a strength of 17. Their dexterity is 16, constitution is 15, intelligence is 10, their wisdom is 10, and their charisma is 14. They are resistant to necrotic damage, which honestly makes a little bit of twisted sense. They themselves are not undead, but it's likely that the vampire that made them passed along some of its resistance to its familiar. They are immune from being charmed, except by being charmed by the vampire master. The vampire familiar has dark vision out to 60 feet and a passive perception of 14. They clock in with a challenge rating of 3. Under traits, the familiar has vampiric connection. Okay, it breaks down like this. When the vampire and its familiar are on the same plane of existence, they can communicate telepathically. Plus, the vampire can perceive through that familiar's senses. It can smell what the familiar smells. It can see what the familiar sees. All of that stuff. And that's pretty powerful. I mean, and consider this. This stat block lists no restriction of space, just the same plane of existence. This vampire can be safe in a castle or in an underground lair, wherever, and the familiar can be out and among the people miles away, hundreds of miles away, maybe thousands of miles away, and that vampiric connection is still going to be there. And I can think of several ways to make use of that. For actions, the vampire familiar can make 2 umbral dagger attacks. And then I can't help but wonder if this was inspired by the umbral dagger found in mind blank, Dark Souls 2. But this D&D version, they add +5 to either melee or ranged attack rolls and dish out 5 piercing damage plus 7 necrotic damage. If the target hit is reduced to 0 hit points from the dagger's attack, it takes on the poison condition, which lasts for about 1 hour. If it took on the poison condition, it also takes on the paralyzed condition. As a bonus action, the vampire familiar has deathless agility, which it can take the dash action or the disengage action. All in all, I think that I'd likely end up using this creature more as a spy to the vampire itself, as opposed to cannon fodder or something that they would fight in combat. But I also want to point out one final thing. Take a look at the artwork that accompanied this sneak peek. Notice the 2 holes in the familiar's neck. But look up on the cheek and you're going to notice tears. Now, tell me, knowing that this poor soul has been charmed by the vampire, they cannot resist that vampire's commands. But behind the eyes, they've got to be aware of the torment that they're being put through. And I almost didn't want to point this out, but a lot of folks are citing that Wizards is trying to play it safe and cater to a softer crowd. But I got to tell you, looking at this artwork, I'd say that's a far cry from what we're being presented with. This image, at least to me, it really evokes terror and horror. But tell me what you guys think about this vampire familiar down in the comments. And until next our paths cross, watch this video next.